Hi everybody. At the end of the last video, I said that we were going to continue on with Act 2, Act 2, Scene 3. But there's not an Act 2, Scene 3. It just goes straight to Act 3. I guess I was just super excited and wanted there to be more of Act 2, but there's just not. It just ends there. So I'm excited though. We've made it to Act 3. We're doing good. We're woo-hoo! Getting in there. Handling Hamlet. Alright, so Act 3 begins in a room in the castle. Generally, on stage, the room will be set up similar to the room that we first met Claudius and Gertrude, and he gave his speech about how everybody should have one eye sad and one eye happy about the happenings in Elsinore. So, in this particular act, we have the king, the queen, Polonius, Ophelia, Rosencrantz, and Guildenstern. So it begins with the king. And can you, by no drift of circumstance, get from him why he puts on this confusion, grating so harshly all his days of quiet with turbulent and dangerous lunacy? Alright, so the king is addressing Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, and he's asking them, have you guys, when he means drift of circumstance, it's just like hanging out or by talking with him, have you come across why he is putting on this confusion, why he seems to be out of sorts? And then Rosencrantz says he does confess he feels himself distracted, but from what cause he will by no means speak, which means that Hamlet is being kind of dodgy with him, you know. Guildenstern, nor do we find him forward to be sounded, but with a crafty madness keeps aloof when we would bring him on to some confession of his true state. So Guildenstern here is claiming that they get him close to saying what it is, but then he changes the subject or he moves on to a different topic. And then the queen says, did he receive you well? And Rosencrantz goes, most like a gentleman. And then Guildenstern, but with much forcing of his disposition, which means, you know, they have to really work hard to get him to, you know, be joyful or to be communicative with them or, you know, interact with them. Niggard of question, but of our demands, most free in his response. So basically what that means is that with the questions, they keep asking him questions and he won't answer the questions, but he talks to them. He's, you know, free in his reply to them. He'll discuss things, but when he's addressed directly, he's kind of dodgy. Queen, did you assay him to any pastimes? Did you take him out? Did you show him a good time? What have you done? What pastimes have you shown him? And then Rosencrantz says, Madam, it so fell out that certain players were aught on the way, and he's talking about the players, the actors. Of these we told him, and there did seem in him a kind of joy to hear of it. They are about the court, and as I think they have already ordered this night to play before him. So Rosencrantz is setting up the stage that we're about to have a play, and Hamlet's super excited about it. And then Polonius, of course, has to put his 2 cents in and says, 'tis most true, and he beseeched me to entreat your majesties to hear and see the matter. So Hamlet wanted to make sure that Polonius knew that the king and the queen needed to be present during the play, right? Because he has this grand plan, you know, to stick it to Claudius. So the king says, with all my heart, and it doth much content me to hear him so inclined. Good gentlemen, give him a further edge and drive his purpose on to these delights. So the king's like, yay, this makes me happy that he included us. I'm glad that he seems to be excited about the play. And then when he says give him a further edge, that means keep pushing. Keep pushing for information. And then Rosencrantz says, we shall, my lord. And then Rosencrantz and Guildenstern exit, scene left. And the king speaks to his queen, oh, sweet Gertrude, leave us too. For we have closely sent for Hamlet hither, that he, as 'twere by accident, may here affront Ophelia. So, you guys remember that the king and Polonius have a plan. So when Hamlet is out walking about, that they're going to push Ophelia out, and they're going to hide behind a curtain and watch and see what happens. So the king is like, this is about to happen, girl, you got to go. So that's what he's setting up. And then he says, her father and myself, lawful espials, will so bestow ourselves, hide ourselves, that seen unseen, so they can see, but they will be unseen, we may of their encounter frankly judge and gather by him as he is behaved. So we're going to watch him, we're going to judge what his behavior could potentially mean. And if it be the affliction of his love, or no, that thus he suffers for. So he's like, we're going to watch and see if it is indeed love sickness that he is suffering. And the queen goes, I shall obey you. These are a bunch of obedient women in Hamlet. I shall obey you. And for your part, Ophelia, I do wish that your good beauties be the happy cause of Hamlet's wildness. So the queen is, she's hopeful that he's lovesick, and I would be hopeful if I was his mother as well, because if he's not lovesick and he's miserable, then he's miserable because his mother was a tart and married his uncle not even 2 months after the death of his father. So if I were Gertrude, I would hope it was something else other than me, or I'd feel guilty. But hey, whatever. And then she says, so shall I hope your virtues will bring him to his wonted way again, to both your honors. And Ophelia goes, Madam, I wish it may. And then the queen exits. And then Polonius starts giving Ophelia direction on how to act. So he says, Ophelia, walk you here. Gracious, so please you, we will bestow ourselves. And then he's giving Ophelia directions. He hands her a book on stage, and he goes, read on this book. That show of such an exercise may color your loneliness. So what he's saying is, read this book to sort of hide the fact that you're wandering the hallways alone. Right? So it will color your loneliness. So it will, kind of disguise what you're doing. And he says, we are oft to blame in this. 'Tis too much proved that with the devotions visage and pious action, we do sugar o'er the devil himself. So he's talking about the fact that they are setting Hamlet up, that they are, in essence, tricking him, but they're doing it, Polonius believes, for his own good, right? So it's sugar, this deed, even though it's a bad deed, it's, setting somebody up would be devilish, would be sinful, but they do it with kind of a sugar coating. So that's what that means. And then the king, and an aside, and we've learned that aside means that he's speaking to the audience. So he says, oh, 'tis too true, how smart a lash that speech doth give my conscience. Now, see, this is really important because what King Claudius is talking about, that the speech that Polonius has just given has affected his conscience, because he knows in his head that he too committed a sin. He killed King Hamlet, but he did it because he loved Gertrude, and also because I think he wanted the crown, but right now he's just concentrating on the fact he's claiming that he did it for love, that he wanted to win Gertrude. And so then he continues, the harlot's cheek, beautied with plastering art, is not more ugly to the thing that helps it than is my deed to my most painted word, O heavy burden. And this is really important for us because at this point we don't know how Claudius feels about the fact that he killed his brother. We don't know. Is he happy? Is he sad? We don't know. But this right here, when he says, oh, heavy burden, and he gives the example, and this is a really good example too, because he's talking about the harlot's cheek. So he's talking about, a prostitute. He's talking about a lady of the night. And he's talking about how these women will disguise their ugliness or the fact that, they're, just they live on the streets, they're tired, they're haggard, and they hide these things with makeup. And so he feels that, like a prostitute, he's hiding his misdeeds, right? So it's kind of neat. So then, but we also learn, oh, heavy burden, the king feels guilty. Claudius feels guilty for murdering King Hamlet. And this is really cool, and this is one of the great things about Shakespeare, is that his characters are never just good or just bad. They're always really complex, and I think that's what makes Shakespeare's characters so timeless is the fact that none of us are all good or all bad. We're all complicated and complex. So I like that we get this from Claudius fairly early on so we can kind of see how this develops. Like later, we're told it's going to hate him, but still in the back of our head, we still have the fact that he loves Gertrude, and that will cause him to be complicated. Okay, so let's keep going. Polonius, I hear him coming, let's withdraw, my lord. So at this point, they would jump behind the curtains. And then Hamlet walks in. And then we perhaps have the most famous soliloquy in the play. And this is the to be or not to be. That is the question. So when you start that, and when he says to be or not to be, it simply means to live or not to live. Because right now in this soliloquy, Hamlet is trying to decide if it is better to live with the pain that he has or if it would be better to die. So let's keep going. He says, whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing end them. So the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. So it's basically just the day-to-day garbage that we put up with. Oh, you get in your car, it's going to take you 20 minutes to get there. You literally have 10 minutes and you're completely out of gas. Okay? Slings and arrows, little things that happen. Those little things that just build up and build up and build up and just avalanche. It's just too much. So he's talking about, is it noble just to go on and suffer these things? Or should I take arms against a sea of trouble and end them? Right? Or just end. And then he goes to die, to sleep. Because, in our mind, when we think about death, the closest thing that we think of is sleep. Death must be like sleeping. And so his brain is going in stream of conscious to die, to sleep, and then he goes no more. And by a sleep, to say we end the heartache and the 1,000 natural shocks that flesh is heir to. And I love that, just by being human, just by going out in the world and peopling like we are vulnerable to having our feelings hurt, or falling in love with somebody who just doesn't reciprocate those feelings, or just the 1,000 terrible things that could happen. And then he continues, 'tis a consummation devoutly to be wished, to die, to sleep, perchance to dream. And then he starts to think about what could be after death. And then he draws the parallel to sleep, and then he remembers in sleep that we dream. And he's like, oh. But then he says, there's the rub. For in that sleep of death, what dreams may come. So even though in sleep we know that we dream, but the problem is, the rub is the fact that we don't know what the dreams of death are. Right? And so he continues, when we have shuffled off this mortal coil, this human form, this body that we're all driving around, right? He's like, when we have shuffled off this mortal coil, must give us pause. There's the respect that makes calamity of so long life. Right? So he's like, if we knew what happened when we left our bodies and passed away, if we knew with all certainty, perhaps we wouldn't be so scared. Right? And then he continues with that line of thought. He says, for who would bear the whips and scorns of time, the oppressor's wrong, the proud man's contumely, the pangs of despaired love, the law's delayed, the insolence of office, and the spurns that patient merit of the unworthy takes, when he himself might his quietest make with a bare bodkin. So he makes a list of things that happen to us, being wronged by a bad guy, or a proud, or somebody saying that we're not as good as they are, or this unrequited love, which is pangs of despised love. And so he's naming off all these things that occur to us on the daily. Hopefully not on the daily. That would suck if that happened all the time. But, they happen to us. And he says that that if we, what would keep us from stabbing ourselves with a bare bodkin? That's like a knife right in the chest, like that. And he said, who would these fardels bear to grunt and sweat under a weary life, but that the dread of something after death, the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveler returns, puzzles the will, and makes us rather bear those ills we have than fly to the others that we know not of. Ugh, that is so deep, because if you think about it, as far as Hamlet knows, killing himself would be a mortal sin, and then he would go to hell and he would just burn, right? So, of course, that would make you not want to kill yourself, because surely, having, somebody call you a terrible name would be much better than your entire flesh being consumed in flames. Never-ending flames. That sounds terrible. I think I would choose A over B. And so he's just making the point that, we don't know. This is undiscovered country. And I love it when he says, from whom no traveler returns. Because once you go over the Rainbow Bridge, I guess that's for dogs and cats, but, once you're over there, you're not coming back. Dead men tell no tales. Pirates of the Caribbean, we all know that, right? So, he says it puzzles the will. And so thus conscience, the fact that we're conscious thinkers, that we can, measure out consequences of our actions, that it makes us cowards, that it keeps us from avoiding the pangs of everyday life and committing suicide. And then he continues, and thus the native hue of resolution is sickly or with pale cast of thought, and enterprises of great pith and moment with this regard their currents turn awry and lose the name of action. Now, at this point when he says, soft you now, that means, shh, the fair Ophelia. So he notices Ophelia. So he's telling himself to, shh, stop talking. There's Ophelia. And then he calls her nymph in the orisons. Be all my sins remembered. And it's almost like a confession before he commits the sin, because what we're about to see is Hamlet is very, very harsh with Ophelia. And, he's trying to, make her not love him anymore, because he can't, he has to have that one-track mind of revenge only, kill only. So, that's what's happening here. So, Ophelia sees him, and she says, good my lord, how does your honor for this many a day? I humbly thank you, well, well, well. And another thing we need to know about Hamlet is he's acting a little kooky. Okay, he's a little cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs at this point. And she goes, my lord, I have remembrances of yours that I have longed to redeliver. I pray you now receive them. So basically, Ophelia is standing in front of him with a box of like his Letterman's jacket and all the letters he wrote and the birthday present from last year. And she's like, here's all your stuff. I don't want it anymore. Right? So she's like, here's your junk. We're broke up. But I like that it's, I have remembrances of yours. I wish back when I was dumping boys, I would have thought to just, I have remembrances of yours that I've longed to redeliver. That would have been far more poignant. So, anywho, she says, I pray you now receive them. And Hamlet goes, no, not I. I never gave you aught. So he looks her straight in the face and says, nah, none of that's mine. I never gave you anything. And then Ophelia's confused and taken aback, and she's like, my honored lord, you know right well you did. And with them words of so sweet breath composed, as made the things more rich, their perfume lost. Take these again, for to the noble mind rich gifts wax poor, when givers prove unkind. Ooh, burn! she just burnt Hamlet to bits because she says, you know what, you did. You know you gave me these things. And when you gave them to me, you said the most sweetest and beautiful things to me. But then she said, however, now that these rich, beautiful, wonderful things have lost their lovely aroma, take them. Because gifts are useless when the person who gives them proves to be a lying piece of garbage. Right? That's what she says. She says it far better than I do. And Hamlet goes, ha ha! Are you honest? Now, the word honest here means a couple of different things. In Shakespeare's time, it didn't just mean, oh, you're telling the truth. Honest also meant, are you chaste? Are you pure? Right? And Ophelia's taken aback. She's like, my lord? And he goes, are you fair? And she's confused. And she's like, well, what means your lordship? And then he says that if you be honest and fair, your honesty should admit no discourse to your beauty. Now, when he's saying honest, he's talking about her chastity or her purity. And he's drawing a contrast that beautiful girls, that beauty itself lends itself to making you vulnerable to not being honest, right? Like the hotter girls are, are more likely to not be, So that's what he's saying here. But Ophelia argues with him, and I like this. And she says, could beauty, my lord, have better commerce than with honesty? And so she flips the script on him, and he goes, I truly, for the power of beauty, will sooner transform honesty from what it is to a bawd than the force of honesty can translate beauty into his likeness. This was sometimes a paradox, but now the time gives it proof. Which is kind of shade. And then he says, I did love you once. And then things get really sad because she looks at him and she's like, indeed, my lord, you made me believe so. And then Hamlet goes, you should not have believed me, for virtue cannot so inoculate our old stock, but we shall relish of it. I loved you not. And then Ophelia looks at him and she says, I was the more deceived. And at this point, our Ophelia, whoever's playing Ophelia, you can just see her. Like, that just breaks her. That just breaks her into a billion pieces because it's just real sad. It's just real sad. And so then she says, I was the more deceived. And then Hamlet at this point gets kind of aggressive. He gets aggressive with her. And sometimes he'll grab her. Sometimes, depending on the actor or whatever. So he says, get thee to a nunnery. Why wouldest thou be a breeder of sinners? So basically he's telling her to go be a nun. Don't have children because all men are sinners. That's what he's saying. So don't be a breeder of sin. And he goes, I myself indifferent honest, but yet I could accuse me of such things that it were better my mother had not borne me. So remember we just had a soliloquy where he's trying to decide if it's better to kill himself or not to kill himself. So he's just fed up with everything. And he's like, I wish my mother had never had me. He says, I'm proud, revengeful, ambitious, and I have more offense at my back than have thought to put them in. So he's basically making a list of all the terrible things that he is. And he says, imagination to give them shape or time to act them in. What should such fellows as I do, crawling between earth and heaven? We are errant knaves, all. Believe none of us. Go thy ways to a nunnery. And then he looks at her after he's giving her a list of things that are awful about him, which is also kind of sad because when he does this, we know as an audience that he loves Ophelia and he doesn't want her to love him anymore because he knows that he has to kill Claudius. And in an essence, with a revenge tragedy, our individual who is called to exact revenge pretty much knows they are going to be a dead man. They do not have a bright, shiny future. Once you kill somebody, that's it. That's it. So I think in a way of listing all of these horrible things about himself and trying to reveal his, negative aspects of himself, I think he's trying to talk Ophelia out of being in love with him. Like, he's trying to help her out. But then at the end of it, he looks at her and he goes, "Where's your father?" And this is interesting, and it kind of likens back to the whole Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. Do you remember when he was testing them and he was like, "Why are you here? Why are you here?" And it was almost like he was trying to prove their loyalty, to see who they were loyal to. And in a way, when he asks Ophelia, "Where's your father?" I think this might be Ophelia's loyalty test, right? To see what she's going to say. And she says, "At home, my lord." And so at this point, Hamlet understands very clearly that Ophelia is not going to be loyal to him. And so he says, "Let the doors be shut upon him, that he may play the fool nowhere but in his own house. Farewell." And at this point, Ophelia has decided that Hamlet is in fact mad. I'm sure that she's heard rumors about the castle, that Hamlet's being crazy pants. And she cries out to God and says, "Oh, help him, you sweet heavens." And then Hamlet comes back and he's like, "If thou dost marry, I'll give thee this plague for thy dowry." And dowry's money that a father would give. And he says, "Be thou as chaste as ice, as pure as snow. Thou shalt not escape calumny. Get thee to a nunnery. Go, farewell. Or if thou wilt needs marry, marry a fool. For wise men know well enough what monsters you make of them." Oh, I love that. He's basically telling her that if she marries a man, to marry an idiot, because everybody knows how women can make men total idiots. That's what he's saying here. And so he says, "Farewell, go." And Ophelia at this point is like, "Oh, heavenly powers, restore him." And so she believes hook, line, and sinker that he is completely mad, that he would never say these things to her unless he was mad. So I think it's really important for Ophelia at this point. I think she's sort of latched onto this idea that he's crazy because she needs that. Because if he's not crazy, then the incredible hurtful things that he just said to her would be coming from a sane man. And I think that's too painful for her. So she goes, "Oh, heavenly powers, restore him." And then Hamlet says, "I have heard of your paintings too, well enough. God hath given you one face, and you make yourselves another." I love that too, because he's talking about women. And when he says, "I've heard of your paintings," he's talking about makeup. He's talking about God hath given you one face, so we have a natural face, but then you make yourselves another. So we paint ourselves. He goes, "You jig, you amble, and you lisp." So he's talking about how, like, when women walk, how they'll shake their hips, or they'll, oh, baby talk, like lisp, and nickname God's creatures, like, "Oh, look at the little bunny, and make your wantonness your ignorance." So the feminine wiles, that he's claiming women do, that we like, "Oh, I'm so sad, please don't be mean to me." That business. That's what he's talking about right here. So he's like, "You're just trickers. All of you. Women are trickers." And he says, "I say we will have no more marriages. Those that are married already, all but one, shall live." And you know which couple he does not want to remain married, and that's Gertrude and Claudius. And he says, "The rest shall keep as they are. To a nunnery go." And then he exits. So a lot happens between the two of them. I like this a lot. So then he exits, and Ophelia kind of has her moment on stage. And she says, "Oh, what a noble mind is here o'erthrown." So his brain, a most sensible man has lost all of his business, and it is sad. She says, "Courtiers, scholars, soldiers, eye, tongue, sword, the expectancy and rose of the fair state. the glass of fashion in the mold of form, the observed of all observers, quite down. So she's talking about how great of a man Hamlet is, that his fashion, his form, that he is, all of these things, and what a shame it is that such a great man has been brought down by lunacy. And she says, and I of ladies most deject and wretched, that sucked the honey of his music vows. So she's taking responsibility for this. And she says, now see that noble and most sovereign reason, like sweet bells jangled out of tune and harps. So she's talking about the melody, of a melody being out of tune, much like Hamlet's senses. He's no longer in tune like a musical instrument. He's off key. And she says, that unmatched form and feature of blown youth, blasted with ecstasy. Oh, woe is me, to have seen what I have seen, see what I see. So she's talking about their interaction. She's trying to acclimate to the idea that her beloved is now wackadoodle. So the king and Polonius come from out of behind the curtain or off stage, depending on the stage direction. And the king goes, love, his affections do not that way tend. Claudius isn't buying the love sickness, right? He says, nor what he spake, though it lacked form a little, was not like madness. There's something in his soul, o'er which his melancholy sits on brood, and I do doubt the hatch and the disclose will be some danger. So Claudius is like, this does not sound like love sickness. There's something in there. Something's bothering him. Some melancholy sits and broods in his soul. And I do doubt the hatch and the disclose will be some danger. So if we do not find what is the cause of this, we will be in danger. And he says, which for to prevent, I have in quick determination thus set it down. So the king has a plan. And he says, he shall with speed to England for the demand of our neglected tribute. So he's like, I know what we'll do. We'll send him off to England. We're going to ship Hamlet to England, right? And he says, happily the seas and countries different with variable objects shall expel this something settled mattered in his heart. So when he says, happily the seas and countries different, he's like, he'll have a change of scenery. He'll have something else to focus on besides whatever is in his heart, whatever he's hiding from us. And then he says, whereon his brain still beating puts him thus from fashion of himself. What think you on't? So now he wants Polonius' opinion. And we know Polonius is eating that up. That man is something else. And he says, it shall do well. But yet do I believe the origin and commencement of his grief sprung from neglected love. Polonius has bet on this horse, and he is going to see it finish. Right? He's like, nope. I still say it's love sickness, Claudius. And then he looks over at Ophelia, right? So they're having this entire conversation, and Ophelia is like broken in the corner, just like, she's had this terrible experience, right? And so he looks at her and he goes, oh, how now, Ophelia? You need not tell us what Lord Hamlet said. We heard it all. My lord, do as you please, but if you hold it fit, after the play, let his queen mother all alone entreat him to show his grief. Let her be round with him, and I'll be placed, so please you, in the ear of all their conference. If she finds him not, to England send him, or confine him where your wisdom best shall think. So Polonius has just hatched up another plan. He's like, all right. He's like, let's do this. He said, but of course you will do as you please, but I have an idea. Let's send him to his mother and let him speak with her, and perhaps he will tell her what's going on. And then he says, I will be in the ear of their conference, which means he's going to hide again and spy and watch their meeting. And he says, and if she does not find what's wrong with him, then we'll send him to England. And the king says, it shall be so. And then he goes, madness in great ones must not unwatched go. Because if Claudius isn't buying the lovesick Ophelia angle, then Claudius knows something else is up with Hamlet. And he's sitting on a big old secret, right? So he's nervous. He's super nervous. So then they exit. And that is Act 3, Scene 1. I am going to stop here because that's a 35-minute video. And I will pick up next with Act 3, Scene 2. All right, hope you guys liked that.